Incorrect. It is an English person. Peter Gabriel plays flute on the album. 1970. Jethro Tull. Nope. The name of the album is Mona Bone Jakan by Cat Stevens, also known by the name Yusuf. And you guys have heard of Cat Stevens, right? Were any of you alive in 1970? Yeah, anybody own the album? Well, check it out. This song has one of the greatest piano lines in a pop song ever, and it is the song for today because the chorus says, as you can see the name of the song, I think I see the light. And it's a song about somebody gaining spiritual insight, vision, going from a position of blindness to one of sight. And that is a theme that will be throughout the reading today from John 7. I don't just pick these songs randomly, but I do commend that song to you and the album and all of it. Had anybody here heard that song before? Wow, a complete miss, but that makes me excited because I feel like I'm an evangelist for good music. And now you know. That's one of the records that my dad had, and I went through his whole collection, so that's where that came. So I think I See the Light by Cat Stevens. So this story today is picking up where we left off after last week. Jesus was having some pretty difficult teachings. People left him, and now he's going to go into Jerusalem in today's passage where people want to kill him. So his disciples have left. He's under a threat of death. So I'm curious, how do you respond when you are under pressure? I don't know if you've ever received death threats. That may be extreme. Maybe some of you have. You'd be amazed who gets death threats if you're in a position of prominence and authority and somebody doesn't like what you do. But how do you respond under pressure? Do you come out aggressively fighting? Do you keep your head down until it goes away? What's your response to pressure? You act really calm, so you keep a poker face, but it impacts you physically in some noticeable ways. As they say, the body keeps score. When we're under stress, we feel lots of ways. What else? How do you react under pressure? Anyone care to share? Anybody scream? Just rage? You know, road rage? Does that ever happen to any of you? You worried that you wouldn't scream if somebody came to hurt you because you shut down. Oh. Okay. So now we know. You're a screamer. Good to know. Okay. Nobody mess with her. Yeah, I tend to get really quiet and very serious when I'm under pressure. Some people just sort of, when they're under pressure, they say, forget it, and they clear out the ATM and go to Vegas. Lots of different ways to respond under pressure. Anybody have a particular coping mechanism or that they'd like to share? Denial. Well, we know you have them if you don't want to say them. But some people pray, some people call a friend, some people watch a movie, check out a little bit. Jesus is going to be under pressure, and his response, I think, is sort of remarkable. So we're in chapter 7. Just as a recap, Jesus last week in chapter 6 talked about, he was teaching in Capernaum, a city in the northern part of Israel, in Galilee, and he had fed 5,000 people with bread that continued to be available, even though he just started with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he feeds all these people. They follow him, they want more bread, and Jesus says, look, you're only following me because you want food. I have this bread of life. And they say, we want it, tell us what to do. And he says that the way you get this living bread, this bread of life, is simply by believing in him, as opposed to doing lots of holy religious things. It's this question of trust and in a relationship. And then he gets more specific about that bread. And what does he say the bread is? Anybody who was here last week? It's his flesh. Yeah. And then he starts talking about not only do you have to eat his flesh, you have to drink his blood, which would be offensive to us now, but also would be even more offensive possibly to people who actually lived around folks who had ritualistic sacrifice and there was spilling of blood and drinking blood. Animal blood would be bad enough. Human blood was just beyond the pale. And so Jesus says, though, you have to do that. So Jack, question. Yep. I think, so yes, also, it's not a time of famine. So these are people that, it's not sort of Warsaw 1945. It is definitely a difficult time. These are people who are, they shop at the Dollar General, not the Trader Joe's. They probably had some means of sort of subsistence. I'm not trying to discount what you're saying. I'm just trying to, there are probably multiple socioeconomic strata represented of the people that were following him. There were definitely people at the bottom. I don't know that it was sort of a starvation event. I think we can say confidently that these people were folks who probably in their lives experienced food insecurity, and they probably did not have 2,000 calories per day every day. So so you're on the right track. I'm trying to soften it a little bit, but I think you're on the right track. And I think it was not unreasonable for them to say, wow, that food was amazing. You had so much. We filled our bellies. We were totally satisfied. We want more. And I think and I don't think the passage necessarily paints them in a negative light for wanting food. I think Jesus is trying to say, I have fed you physically. That is important. Like, clearly he has compassion on them and does this. How are we going to feed these people? It's more on his mind than theirs. But I think Jesus also knows that human beings who have physical and material needs also have spiritual needs. And so he's trying to, I think, move from one to the other, not to say one is more or less important. I do think it's really key and wonderful that he feeds them first, and then also says, now that you can think clearly because your stomachs aren't growling, now let's have a conversation about big stuff. And he says, essentially, that the bread that your ancestors ate in the desert, the manna that God gave them, they still died. And so there's a bigger question about the meaning of life and afterlife and all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about that too. And I think, so does that help? Follow up more? Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and Jesus follows what James, his brother, would later write in that letter or sermon that we have in the New Testament, because he does see them in need and he does feed them. I think there is this tension in Jesus' ministry where there is so much need around him all the time, a very broken world, and he very clearly does not fix all of it. He heals scores of people. He feeds thousands of people. But it's this sort of unending chasm of need around him all the time, including the oppression that was coming from above in the Roman Empire. And he doesn't really do much about that. Or you could say he does, but it's something that will work out over centuries after his resurrection. So there are many. I heard a sermon recently. I heard portions of it. It was written down, and a friend of mine was reading it to me, and it was a sermon that was all about social and political matters. This is not here. This is in another state. But if anybody heard that sermon and had come to church with any existential, personal, pastoral need or suffering, they would have heard nothing from that sermon that would have helped them in any way with that. And I think there are some churches that I think forget sometimes that, yes, Jesus did do acts like feeding the hungry and healing the sick, but he also did a lot of teaching on spiritual and personal realities. So I think that's something you see in Jesus' ministry. That whole thing where they say Jesus Come on, user agreements. Oh, that's the only, okay. That TV is updating, so I'll have to look at that one. Have you heard the thing attributed to St. Francis incorrectly? Preach the gospel at all times. Use words when necessary. I don't like that. Just going to say that. I'm a preacher. I am offended. But I think I would say preach the gospel at all times in words and in actions. Like it sets up this dichotomy that I think is not in Jesus' ministry. So he feeds the people and then he teaches the people. And it's not one or the other. You sort of need both. They're two sides of the same coin. I could say preach the gospel at all times in words. A lot of people use that phrase, preach the gospel at all times, use words when necessary, again, incorrectly attributed to St. Francis, almost as an excuse to never say anything about Jesus or the gospel. And that's not faithful to Jesus' own example for people in ministry or people in general. So Jesus talks about the body and the blood, eating the flesh, drinking the blood. And this is the thing that causes a lot of people to leave him because it's gross, they're offended. And I didn't get as much into this last week, but the question about how would people then have understood what he was saying and how do we understand it now? It's language that we connect obviously with Holy Communion, and that was my question to you when we began. What is Holy Communion? And we have different understandings, different words for it. Some people call it ordinance, some people call it a sacrament. I think there are two things going on. Jesus saying these words to people in Capernaum, they were not thinking about Holy Communion. I think Jesus was thinking about his death, and I think he was thinking about Passover, and I think he was intentional about what he was saying, and I think the Christian community later on understood this language to be Eucharistic, communion-related. But I don't think the people at the time understood what he was saying about that, because that had not been initiated yet. I do think he was talking about his death, and which he was very cognizant of and started talking about early in his ministry and knew what was happening. And in the very next chapter, it begins to say that the leaders in the Jewish temple complex, those people are already beginning to plot his death. And at the end of the chapter we read, chapter 6, it's already talking about Judas's betrayal. So that's like this drumbeat in the background that's going to get louder and louder. And Jesus knows it from the very beginning. So he's talking about his death, the breaking of his body, and the spilling of his blood. And to say, eat my flesh and drink my blood, he is using the most graphic, violent, jarring, shocking language to get your attention, to say that something that you think is never supposed to happen, meaning the death of the Messiah, that's going to happen. And you're going to think it means that I am not the Messiah, because the Messiah is someone who's supposed to be glorified and have a big gold crown on his head and have people carrying him around, and he's supposed to be a military leader, and you think that's what the Messiah is supposed to be. And when you see that happen, it's going to shock you to your core, and you're going to think there's no way God could work through that. But I want you to actually, and I want you to take it in you so much it'd be like you eat my flesh and drink my blood. He is saying this in the most, again, jarring, shocking way that he knows it's going to offend people. I mean, in Jewish culture, it was seen as, it would make you unclean even to look upon somebody who was being crucified by the Romans. Crucifixion was a common practice, and it'd be hard to live in Jerusalem without seeing a crucifixion or two. But even seeing that would be awful. Contact with blood was something that made you unclean. And so just even brushing up against blood or bodily fluids or a dead body, you had to go through all these purification rituals. So for him to say, you have to drink my blood and eat my flesh, he's being a little bit like Flannery O'Connor. And St. Flannery includes a lot of violence in her short stories. Car wrecks and amputated legs and all kinds of things you're not expecting to see. Graphic stuff. Particularly where people are kind of asleep all the time. And sometimes you really have to do something shocking to get them to wake up. this also the music of Rage Against the Machine would be another thing in this vein, where somebody just wants you to pay attention to what's really going on. And Jesus is trying to get that. And I would say the theme of chapter 6 and chapter 7, all these passages here are about the fact that human beings are exceedingly dense and exceedingly convinced that what we see around us is all that there is. We believe that your career matters and your IRA matters and your tax strategy matters, and your whether you're summa cum laude or magna cum laude matters, that your GPA matters. And I'm not to say that all human life is meaningless. I'm not a nihilist. I think it's about keeping those things. That is, Jesus' work is to try to get people to open their eyes. That's what he did in chapter 6, talking about his body and blood and eating his flesh and drinking his blood. Note that he doesn't backpedal or try to soften it at all. He doesn't say, it's just a symbol, guys. I'm using a metaphor. He sort of doubles down on the whole thing. And he does it unapologetically. He doesn't, when people start leaving, he doesn't say, let me now explain. He just sort of leaves it. So that's that's all recap for today. And so we begin today back in Galilee, likely still in Capernaum, which is his home base. And I'm going to say a prayer, and then we'll read this story. Almighty God, we who are under pressure, help us to see Jesus as he faces some strong winds, and take some help and some hope from this text. I pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, chapter 7, verses 1 through 52. Oh, and by the way, there is a new schedule, I think, maybe on the place when you came out. I will be out on April 30th, and so the schedule has been adjusted to reflect that. And so pick up a hard copy. It was also emailed to all of you guys this morning. All right, after this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He did not wish to go about in Judea because the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. Anybody have a different translation of that verse? Just out of curiosity. Yeah, Kelly, you have a kid's version. Tell it.
You want the first verse?
Yeah.
After this, Jesus went to Galilee, going from village to village, for he wanted to stay out of Judea, where the Jewish leaders were plotting his death.
Okay. All right, there are some other manuscripts in the Greek that are a little bit different, and I was curious if anybody had a translation with that, but okay. All right, so Jesus he's going about in Galilee. The Jews are looking for an opportunity to kill him. Now, the Jewish festival of booths was near, so his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one who wants to be widely known acts in secret. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers believed in him. Jesus said to them, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify against it that its works are evil. Go to the festival yourselves. I am not going to this festival, for my time has not yet fully come." After saying this, he remained in Galilee. But after his brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went, not publicly, but as it were, in secret. Let me pause there, just those first 10 verses, because we've got a lot to digest. I want to take it in bite-sized pieces. So what jumps out at you? What questions do you have? What struck you as you read those first 10 verses? Things that confused you, interested you, intrigued you. What struck you?
Are they talking about blood brothers or bros?
Great question. Are they talking about blood brothers or his bros? So, and this would be where, if anybody grew up in the Roman Catholic tradition, you know about the perpetual virginity of Mary, and that he had no human siblings. That is, and they would interpret this as being sort of cousins or extended relatives. But I don't think that's what the text says. There's other parts in the New Testament that talk about sisters and brothers, but that's a place where the Protestant tradition and the Roman Catholic tradition would agree to disagree. But I think the way I read the text is yes, these are his brothers. And it gives you an insight into maybe some of the family dynamic. They want him, well, what do you think they want him to do? Show off. Yep. It's possible, it's not clear in the text, but it's possible that they want him to get in trouble. Brothers are often daring each other to try things. And so maybe they know he's in some hot water. Maybe they'd like Jesus to be put away for a little while. Who knows? So maybe they're daring him to poke the bear more. Carol, you had a hand up. Oh, great question. Did Jesus lie to his brothers? Jesus, no more Mr. Nice Messiah. Yeah, so in this exchange, his brothers, and let's pretend that the brothers are nice. They don't want Jesus to get in the hot water, but they're kind of his PR consultants. They say, look, Jesus, you've been making some waves, you've been doing some impressive stuff. It's a great time for you to go to Jerusalem because it's this great feast and there'll be a ton of people there, and you can, think of the followers you'll get on social media if you do some big impressive stuff in Jerusalem this time of year. And his answer is, my time has not yet come. Where has he said something like that before in John's gospel? His mom. So this is apparently with his family. Jesus says this a lot. Jesus, would you take out the recycling? My time has not yet come. So he said it to Mary at the wedding in Cana of Galilee when she said, they've run out of wine. He says, woman, what has that to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So I think in the wedding speech, it was more about the time for my ministry has not yet come. I think here it's a little bit more about his death. And as we go through the Gospels, you'll see my hour, my time seems to be more and more clearly about his death. And I think he says that here because he knows because they are looking to arrest him and kill him. And so he says, look, if I go to Judea now, to Jerusalem, I'll be executed. And my time is not yet come. I have stuff to do. He says, your time, however, is always here. And he has this thing about your time versus my time, your world versus my world. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify against it that its works are evil. So Jesus very clearly sees a distinction between what he's trying to do, what his brothers are doing in their lives and their world. Jesus has a very different perspective. Kind of human spheres of action versus divine spheres of action and influence. Kelly. And I haven't answered the question yet about Jesus lying, but I'm getting to it. Kelly. Mm. Yeah, so he says, in verse 9, we read, after saying this, he remained in Galilee, so some time. Sukkot, this festival, is a 7-day festival with a bonus 8th day at the end. And this says it's before the festival. It says it was near the time of the festival of booths in verse 2. So the temple was the only place where they really had it because there was all this stuff you had to do at the temple. So Judea is sort of the wider region around Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the city, the temple in the middle, and that's where the big stuff took place. But it was observed all over because I feel like I'm diagramming a sentence and I keep getting farther and farther. But it's good. So just stay with me, and if you have questions, pull back. So we'll do some stuff on what the festival of Sukkot is. It's called the Festival of Booths, or Sukkot. Sukkot is plural, booth. Sukkah is one, booth. And this is commanded in Leviticus 23 to the Jews to remember when they lived in temporary shelters as they were wandering in the desert. They lived in booths or tents. And so Leviticus 23 says, for 7 days, on the 15th day of the month of Tishrei, beginning then. So that's the Jewish calendar is different from ours because it's ours. We round up to 30 or 31. They keep the strict lunar calendar about 28 days. Basically, it's September or October. It moves around in our calendar, and it's a harvest festival. So you build a booth or a hut in your backyard, and you live in it for 7 days. Or you have it there in your backyard and you just go into it periodically. You don't live in it, but it's there, sort of a symbolic thing that you do. I lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, a very Jewish neighborhood, for 3 years. And at the time of year Sukkot, you'd be walking down Summit Street and you'd see all these, in people's front yards, backyards, you'd see these kind of fabric tents or booths that get built out there. So if you ever live in an Orthodox community, you'd see things like this. And there's waving of branches, and there's celebrating the harvest, and there's some prayers, and there's some water, and a lot of stuff for the 7-day festival with an 8th day at the end of a special celebration. So the point of this is this festival is a week long. It says it's near the time, the first conversation is when it's coming up. So it could be a week before, it could be 2 weeks before the festival starts. All that to say is, to Carol's question, Jesus could have had this conversation 2-3 weeks before he goes, because when he does go, it's at the middle of the festival that he begins to teach. So my reading of the story would be that he decided not to go. He stayed around for a little while, and then he decided to go. Changed his mind. But this does get into the whole thing that can be awkward for folks if you have sort of a Jesus as Superman understanding of the Messiah, as opposed to Jesus as human. And Christianity does this really difficult, odd thing, which is to say that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. But it gets difficult and weird because that means we believe Jesus was a toddler, and Jesus was an adolescent, and Jesus was a headstrong 20-year-old, and then Jesus was in his 30s here in the story we read today. And if you allow for his humanity, you have to allow for things like him one day deciding to have pita and hummus and then changing his mind and saying, actually, I think I'd just like to have a nice tapenade, ground up olives. Jesus just being human and trying to figure out his divine identity. When he's 2 years old, he doesn't understand that he is the savior of the world because he's fully entered humanity, and he doesn't have the cognitive ability to understand that because he's still mostly pre-verbal. So Jesus, so it's muddy, it's complicated. And we never get a full explanation of how could he say, I'm not going to the temple, and then change his mind. What, God changing his mind? I don't like that. Because I thought Jesus is Superman. Well, he's not. We have this complicated paradox of being fully human and fully divine. And so I think his decision to not go was one that made sense. He knew that he had more teaching and more ministry he wanted to do, and if he goes, he risks death, and that would be the end of, and he knows he needs to die, but not quite yet. So he's thinking about it, and he's also someone who, as we know, spends time in prayer. We know that when he chooses the 12 disciples, he spends all night in prayer, and hears from the Father, and then comes down the mountain and chooses the 12. We know that before he goes to his death, he prays and says, not my will, but thy will be done, in a very complicated thing, again, about Jesus' identity, the Father's identity, and how we understand their own understanding of themselves. So, are you with me on that? So, I don't think Jesus lied. I think he thought he wasn't going, and then he changed his mind, and he went. And it says he went in secret, I think because the reason he didn't want to go the first time is because he didn't want to die yet. And now he wants to go, and he goes kind of cloaked. All right, you had a question, Andy.
So it seems like if I read that he had a plan, he knew what the plan was, and he has to create a spectacle enough that people will remember his death. So if you have to, like TikTok has got to go viral, he's got to do something, because if he dies now or he gets
Yeah.
the right thing towards that.
Yeah, I think you're onto something, that he is, over the course of his ministry, Jesus has an impossible task. How do you be a human being who doesn't look anything like what they expect a Messiah to be? He knows as an adult his divine identity and mission. And he, as the incarnate Word of God, has to try to make this understandable, or parts of it understandable, to people. How do you tell people that their whole way of understanding the world and life and God is actually upside down? And I think you're right. I think he wants to do several things that draw attention to that, and will be then collected and gathered and will be part of what people understand later on. And you see Jesus doing things like this. He says this explicitly at the end of John's Gospel, where he'll say, I have so much more to say to you, you won't understand it now. And Jesus will say things to his disciples like, oh, you of little faith. He knows that human beings are scared, doubting, confused, and these are really huge ideas and concepts that he's trying to convey. And so I think a lot of this is trying to, different ways of trying to get at the same thing that then will then lead to to a body of knowledge that will help and become maybe clearer as he goes. So let's keep going. Before we do, let me check and see if there's something else I wanted to say. Okay, no, I think we covered it. All right, so verse 11 and ongoing. So he goes to Jerusalem, he goes in secret. The Jews were looking for him at the festival and saying, where is he? And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds. While some were saying, he is a good man, others were saying, no, he is deceiving the crowd. Yet no one would speak openly about him for fear of the Jews. About the middle of the festival, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. The Jews were astonished at it, saying, how does this man have such learning, when he has never been taught? Then Jesus answered them, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there's nothing unjust in him. Did not give you the law, yet none of you keeps the law. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? Okay, it's a lot. It's chunky. This is chunky peanut butter here. So that's why I say I'm taking it in smaller bites. You ever take a huge bite of peanut butter? It takes you about 15 minutes to just chew and swallow that. So I get it. Okay, so he gets to Jerusalem, and it says the Jewish leaders, are saying, where is he? Remember, this is a huge complex. This is the center of the Jewish religion. This is a massive physical structure. It's a massive financial organization. It employs hundreds, if not thousands, of people kind of around the area. I mean, it's one of the wonders of the ancient world. And he's there. And so, if you were to go to, Disneyland or something and put out a little milk crate, stand up on it and start teaching, the authorities would get concerned. If we were having a Sunday service and somebody stood up in the pew, if Stuart Kelly stood up and said, I object. And that's sort of what's going on. Jesus is going into the mouth of the bear here. People then pro this, anti that. Some people are pro-Jesus, some people are anti-Jesus. I think it's also worth noting that very few people would know what he looks like. Right? Put yourself in the first century. No cameras. What's that? No newspapers, no TV. So people might have heard a description of this guy. Everybody's Jewish, so that doesn't help. Yeah. He would have had potentially a Galilean accent. But that's kind of all people would have known. So for him to be secret is not that hard. I think there could be a supernatural sort of Jedi mind trick thing going on here about maintaining his secret identity. But he could just be some guy standing up teaching, and people not, so he knows who he is, but very few people around would have known who he is. We're going to see Nicodemus at the end here. So Nicodemus is there from chapter 3, remember the guy? So he comes back. So he might have known. So there's a few people that might know who he is, but there's a lot of people. I mean, there would have been, it's a huge space, thousands of people there, and many would not know who he was. So he's in the middle of the temple, in the middle of the festival, and he begins to teach. So again, he's trying to keep secret, but a lot of people don't know who he is. The Jews were astonished when he begins teaching, and they say, how does he have such learning? In the Greek, it's how does he know letters when he has never been taught? So it's not saying that he's not smart. They're saying he is smart. Wow, this guy knows a lot. But we're surprised that somebody who looks like he does or talks like he does knows so much. Yeah. I mean, yes, but it wouldn't have been necessarily like Speaker's Corner or in London where people do this, but it would not have been an unheard of sort of thing, because again, it's a giant crowd. I mean, it's almost like a town square situation. So if somebody wanted to gather folks around and teach, yes, but it wouldn't have necessarily been like 20 people doing it at the same time. So not unheard of, but not everybody doing it either. So he gets up and he starts teaching, and they want to know, how does he have such learning? He's never been taught. And Jesus says, in this convoluted Johannine Jesus-y way, my teaching is not mine, but it's his who sent me. Humility. Interesting. And also he knows who he is. He knows he's been given this teaching, and so he is just delivering it. And he says, anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I'm speaking on my own. So he knows that there are people who disagree about him. And he doesn't try to prove it. He doesn't get defensive. He just says, look, there's some people who really are kind of in tune with God, and they'll know. And there's some people that are not, and they won't know. He does give one little test of how you can discern whether somebody is the real deal or not. And it's in verse 18. He says, those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent me is true. So if you're speaking to build up your own personal brand, if you're speaking to kind of make yourself look big and important, you might want to be skeptical of that. But I'm not doing that. I'm speaking not for my own glory, but for the one who sent me. And we kind of know that Jesus is not speaking for his own glory because he's not telling anybody anything they want to hear. He's not trying to take power. He is really just trying to get through to people about what God is like. And he begins to, you can see he's even less interested in making people like him when he says, did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. In other words, why are you questioning my authority? Moses had authority. You agree Moses had authority, and yet you don't really do what he said. You may do it on the outside, but you don't really have the love of God in your hearts, which is kind of the most important thing. So if you don't do what and probably a lot of them didn't do even the regular stuff that you're supposed to do either. So he says, look, you believe Moses' authority. You don't do what he says, so why are you questioning my authority? Clearly, authority isn't what really matters to you. There's a bit of a, you're kind of putting up a front. And Jesus, he's this great psychoanalyst. He knows that many times when human beings say, I don't want to do something, or they disagree with something, there's the surface level of why they say they're disagreeing with something, and then there's what's actually going on underneath. You get invited to a party. You decide not to go. And you tell the person you live with, I'm really tired, I'm not going. That may be partially true. It also could be the case that you are having a day where you feel deeply insecure about your personal appearance. You feel insecure about somebody who might be at that event. Any number of things could be going on. There's a show right now that I'm watching. It ran from 2022 until 23, 3 seasons, called Somebody Someplace. It is vulgar. I can't recommend it, but it's some of the best writing and most insightful depiction of human relationships and families. It's a family in Kansas, in Manhattan, Kansas. So it's Big 12, so it's good. And a daughter has died from cancer. Another daughter has moved home after a failure to launch, and the third daughter is a perfectionist. Her life falls apart. Mom goes to rehab. All kinds of stuff going on. But the main character, Sam, she is very loud and brash all the time. And kind of one of those people that just likes to say shocking things to kind of be funny or whatever. And a lot of friends and all that. And then she finally finds a guy that she likes, and she's really nervous about asking him out. Finally, he asks her out, and they're getting ready to go on a date, and she's trying to get ready in the mirror, and she just breaks down all these issues around how she sees herself and her physicality and her body and her personhood. And you see that the whole she has, the big brash persona, is just a facade. And inside she's someone who's deeply hurting, whose mother was checked out and sort of neglectful emotionally, and all that is sort of displayed in her inability. And so she wipes off the lipstick, she kind of pulls the curls out of her hair, takes off the nice top she's wearing, puts on a flannel shirt, and goes to meet with the guy. And it to me just shows there's the thing that we think is going on with people and what's actually going on with people. And so these people are coming at Jesus. Like when atheists say, I don't believe in God because of blah, 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 blah. There's usually some intellectual thing. I read Ayn Rand and now I don't believe in God. And I want to build skyscrapers and own a train. So, but usually people I've met who are atheists, the intellectual stuff is a front. And what's actually going on is deep pain, often from a family member who was religious, or just an experience in church that was problematic at a key time. Atheism often is anger because of trauma. And it's easier to cut off a relationship. That's a defense mechanism. So if I view God as responsible for this hurt, I will cut off my relationship with God. Problem solved. Jesus knows they're asking these questions about his authority and where did he go to seminary and all that sort of stuff. And he says, look, that's not the real question. There's something else going on here. And he wants to get to that. And he gets to it and he says, why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? It's clearly a rhetorical question. He's asking them to say, like, why are you so angry? Why have you ever been like really worked up about something? And you know how like intoxicating that is? And you get myopic, meaning tunnel vision. And by the grace of God, sometimes you are pulled out of it. You can see yourself and you're like, my gosh, why am I so angry? And this is what he's trying to do here. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? Well, what is so threatening about me to you that you need to end my life? And so they say, you have a demon. Who's trying to kill you? It's sort of a defense, again, like, no, you. And then he begins to talk. I'll keep reading from verse 21. Jesus answered them, I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. Because of this, Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So again, this is going back to that story where he healed a man on the Sabbath at that pool where the angel will trouble the water and all that sort of thing. Remember, Jesus healed him on the Sabbath. So that's continues. This is Jesus' crime. Healing on the Sabbath, and he's gone back to the scene of the crime, basically, and that's why they're clearly beginning to realize who he is. We get this in verse 25. Now, some people of Jerusalem are saying, "Is not this the man who they are trying to kill?" So they're beginning to realize who he is. The word is spreading. And basically he's saying, yes, I healed this man on the Sabbath. You're mad about that? But remember, in our own tradition, if a man can be circumcised in the Sabbath to keep the law of Moses, why is it wrong for me to heal a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Do not judge by appearance, he said, but judge with right judgment. That phrase is key, and that's sort of everything I've been talking about. Appearances versus what's actually going on. And Jesus has the one thing where he is like Superman is he has X-ray vision, but not into the bank safe or whatever, but into the human heart. And he knows most people judge by what's on the outside, and he sees what's on the inside. And he says, you're worried about the outside. Did I heal this man on the Sabbath or not? And he says, you're again missing the forest for the trees. The whole point of the Sabbath is the restoration and wholeness of all things. And I brought that to this man. And you're more concerned about the date on the calendar than the point of the law. So people begin to get who he is, and they say, look, in verse 26, here he is speaking openly, but they say nothing to him. Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Messiah? This means that they think they're not arresting him because they actually believe he's the Messiah. You can arrest him. But if he might actually be the real deal, then you don't want to arrest him. Okay, so let me read. Yet we know, so picking up, this is what the crowd is saying. We know where this man is from, but when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he is from. Then Jesus cried out as he was teaching in the temple, you know me, and you think you know where I am from. I have not come on my own, but the one who sent me is true. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. Then they tried to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. Yet many, when the Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this man has done? The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering such things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent temple police to arrest him. Jesus then said, I will be with you a little while longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. You will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I'm going, you cannot come. Then the Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What does he mean by saying, you will search for me, but you will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come? On the last day of the festival, the great day, while Jesus was standing there, he cried out, let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. As the scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water. Now he said this about the Spirit, which believers in him were to receive, for as yet there was no Spirit, because Jesus was not yet glorified. When they heard these words, some of the crowd said, this is really the prophet. Others said, this is the Messiah. But some asked, surely the Messiah does not come from Galilee, does he? Has not the scripture said that the Messiah is descended from David and comes from Bethlehem, the village where David lived? So there was a division in the crowd because of him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him. Then the temple police went back to the chief priests and Pharisees, who asked them, never has anyone spoken like this. Then the Pharisees replied, surely you have not been deceived too, have you? Has any one of the authorities or of the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd, which does not know the law, they are accursed. Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus before and who was one of them, asked, our law does not judge people without first giving them a hearing to find out what they're doing, does it? They replied, surely you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search, and you will see that no prophet is to arise from Galilee. Okay, so wrapping up, they're debating who he is, question of his authority. He's there on the last day of this big feast in the temple, and they try to arrest him because he's claiming to be the Messiah. They are not able to arrest him. We don't find out until the end why. It says they are unable to arrest, or that no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come, verse 30. We don't find out why until verse 45. Why did the temple police not arrest him? They believed, or at least they were struck by him. They said, never has anyone spoken like this. They find Jesus compelling. This is another example in the Gospels of the people who are the religious authorities who are supposed to know stuff about God completely miss the main point. And the people on the margins, these are the security guards, they get it. This is like at Jesus' birth. The shepherds are the ones that are invited to witness this arrival of the Christ child, not the fancy people in the seminaries and the boardrooms and all those kind of places. The Samaritan woman at the well, all these, this is another example of as Cat Stevens said, I think I see the light, even within the Pharisees. Nicodemus, he is sort of saying, hey guys, our law doesn't condemn people right away. There's a due process. We have to go through a thing. And they're like, what, are you from Galilee too? You're on this guy's side? So there are people that see it and people that don't. What we get in this is Jesus, you see Jesus trying to communicate who he is, and every time he says something, people seem to get even more confused. He says, where I'm going, you cannot come. Now Jesus, to give the crowd some credit, Jesus is cryptic in the way he talks about it. Where I'm going, you cannot come. They're like, what do you mean? They're thinking very literally. It's almost like when he met with Nicodemus and said, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus said, I can't go back inside my mom's uterus. Very literal thinking. Jesus is trying to bring people along. He says they wonder if he's going to go to the Jewish diaspora. That's what it means, the dispersion among the Greeks. The Jewish people that lived kind of outside of Israel, among the Greeks. And Jesus doesn't answer them. He doesn't really fully explain it. He does say, and I think my reading of that is Jesus sort of getting that people aren't getting what he's saying. And imagine if he said to them, because he does in other places say, I will be arrested, I will be tried, I will be killed, and on the third day I rise again. And his own disciples are like, no. So it's this impossible thing of like, how do you tell people something, even if you spell it out for them, they won't get it? How do you get underneath to help them understand? Instead of trying to explain it to them, he uses this idea of living water, which he already used before when he talked to the woman at the well. This last day of the festival, there were a lot of the rituals that involved water. So some scholars think that this was going on maybe behind Jesus as he was saying this. If you want water, real water, living water, that you'll never be thirsty again, come to me. And he says, the result of this is out of your heart will flow rivers of living water. I will be the source of your life, and you will be transformed, essentially is what he is saying. Then people fight. Is he the Messiah? Is he not the Messiah? And they can't get past the fact that he's from Galilee. And they quote Scripture. And they say, he's supposed to be from David's town, Bethlehem. And that's why the Pharisees say he can't be the Messiah because he's from Galilee. We, of course, know from the narratives that are not in John's Gospel, but in Luke's Gospel, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and we know that whole story. I'm going to just wrap up with our main points, and we'll pick it up again next week. Jesus' sense of self and mission. Jesus knows exactly who he is, makes no apologies, doesn't defend, and he's not sort of confrontational about it. He just is who he is. He says, I'm not going to go to the temple. He changes his mind, and he goes to the temple. He stands up and tells them who he is, and he doesn't get in this long, drawn-out argument with him. He says what's on his mind, and he knows clearly what he is here to do. My time, my hour, he knows what he's here to do. And I just point that out as something that I find it's so rare. I think I've only really met one person who knows themselves and what they're here to do, and that's Jesus. Everybody else is kind of making it up. Everybody else is a basket of insecurities and anxiety and confusion and emotional responses that we ourselves have and don't understand. Jesus' sense of self is always just breathtaking to me. He's like the opposite of me. I'm like overthinking and calculating what I should do and how I should arrange my day. And should I go to this thing or nothing? I got this invitation. Do I respond or do I? All this sort of mental calculus. And Jesus just does what he wants to do. He knows who he is and knows what he's here to do. It's really, I find it just compelling and engaging and attractive. The hiddenness and strangeness of Jesus' identity. This is a big theme of John's whole thing. Remember light and dark in John 1, the first chapter. And this continues here, where he talks about what's seen on the outside, the appearance, versus what it actually is true on the inside. Just pay attention as we continue to go through this. Who sees, who gets it, who is like the temple police and Nicodemus versus who are the chief priests and the other folks in the crowd that don't get it. And I think, seeing yourself in that story, there are times in our lives where we are both. We have been more one than the other. And then this idea of living water. It's just an image that I encourage you to sit with. As you drink water this week, as you bathe this week, as you use water, as you cook with it, as you boil your tea. Jesus picks this ubiquitous thing, which is a big word meaning everywhere, this thing that's around us all the time. And he says, I am like that, but this is living water, which will never run out, and you will never be thirsty. This is, again, Jesus, the one who understands the human condition so well. Thirst, he's clearly not talking about literal water, because he says, that he is the source of this water, and he's standing there, there's not water pouring out of him. He is talking about his death. I mean, we will know that later when the water comes from his side. He knows that, we don't. But he is, so the thirst he's talking about is not physical thirst. It's that soul longing, that desire to be home, that desire to be fully loved and fully known, that desire to be at peace and relaxed. I don't know if you ever do. I have a practice of mindfulness that shows up imperfectly in my life in lots of different ways. I'm no George Harrison with my mindfulness and meditation, but I'll do things where I take a deep breath and sort of focus on my body, and as I do that, I'm amazed how much tension I am carrying in my body. I don't know if you've ever done this. You ever take a deep breath and like somebody says, relax your shoulders, and you're like, I'm not tense. They're like, no, relax your shoulders. And you're like, ugh. And you realize your shoulders were up here. They've been up here all day, and you just didn't know. And like, relax your shoulders. Oh. And the thirstiness of being a human being is to want peace and rest and joy. And Jesus knows that we don't have that, and so he says, I'm here to give that to you. And he's trying to use an image that we understand water, but to say this is living water, and if you drink it, you'll never be thirsty. It's such a compelling thing. So as you drink your water, as you boil your tea, as you do all these things, think about Jesus, the living water, with you today. And let's close with a prayer. Dear God, help us to see you and to receive this living water by trusting in you, that we would not be thirsty.